may not be suitable for all audiences.
But it's very rude to sit down without being invited.
I'll say it's rude. It's very, very rude indeed.
Art 101 with Mr. Burgher.
Scholars, welcome back to Art 101 with me, Mr. Burgher, a professional artist and master educator attempting to provide you with the best in art historical content. If you like the content, please subscribe.
Do you want to cover? You're the professors. You cover.
Some time ago, I created a series of videos on the 8 Impressionist art exhibitions. Today, what I've done is I've put all those videos together into one seamless package of explanation of all 8 of the Impressionist art exhibitions. Now, if you want to go back and take a look at those individually, be my guest to do so. The links are down in the description. But in the meantime, here's this. From 1874 to 1886, the various artists and would-be impressionists came together for 8 separate exhibitions over those years. Now, some people think that this was a movement to somewhat replace the salon system that was happening in Paris at this time, but that is a disingenuous statement. Many of the big-name artists would actually leave the show to eventually go back and exhibit in the more profitable salon. They would have amateurs, realists, and, of course, those that would eventually become known as the Impressionists. Even among true Impressionist painters, deep divisions would emerge over time. Some of the information out there is a little bit challenging to decipher because a lot of the documentation, the catalogs, and accounts contained omissions and errors.
Are you interested in the real story or just the patriotic crap they want you to believe?
The first of these exhibitions was hosted in Nader's photography studio from April the 15th to May the 15th of 1874. This Paris exhibition was organized by Claude Monet, Camille Pissarro, Edgar Degas, Pierre-Auguste Renoir, Alfred Sisley, and Bertha Morisot. The show would include 165 works by 30 different artists. Monet's Impression Sunrise was among them and responsible for the group getting their name. Although 3,500 people came and paid to see this exhibition, most would come to laugh and joke at the expense of the work that was there. The reporters and the critics absolutely hated it. Although not an impressionist, Edgar Degas was involved because he needed some money after his family business had just failed. Wanting to show to a wider audience, he felt like being a part of this show would provide money and potential earnings down the line. Artists would purchase shares in the exhibition, as this was an event incorporated with shareholders. The charter was finished on December the 27th, 1873 by Monet and Pissarro, and they would ask 30 francs a year to purchase the shares for that artist to be included in the show. Now, Edgar Degas was responsible for getting the most signatures of people signed up to be in the show, but the vast majority of the people that he signed up were not Impressionist-style painters. They were realist painters that were allowed to be included so they could potentially earn more money. Now, this incorporated company was not called the Impressionists quite yet. The company was actually called the Joint Stock Company of Artists, Painters, Sculptors, Engravers, and Lithographers. Now, once they kind of had their nucleus of artists and some sort of understanding of who was going to be in this show, the first group decision was whether or not they were going to allow Paul Cézanne to be included. Past year, Cézanne was very highly criticized, and he wanted to submit a painting called A Modern Olympia. His buddy Pissarro was the only one that really was in favor of allowing Cézanne in, but because Degas was getting so many of those realist painters to become included, and these so-called outsiders were coming into the group. This collective would not reject their fellow professional, so Paul Cézanne was allowed in, but with very little fanfare.
Hey, what do you want to do? What? Welcome to Boston! We love New York, it's here!
Pierre-Auguste Renoir was to oversee the hanging the show by classifying the work and having some semblance of categories when organizing how the show would be hung. His brother Edmond created the catalog. Now there were 30 artists that were included in that show. They would include Zachary Astruc, Anton Ferdinand Tendu, Edouard Ballard, Eugene Bolden, Felix Roquemond, Edouard Brandon, Pierre Isidore Hirault, Adolphe Felix Callas, Paul Cézanne, Gustave Collin, Louis Debras, Edgar Degas, Jean-Baptiste Armand Guillemin, Louis Latroque, Ludovic Napoleon Lepic, Stanislas Lepin, Jean-Baptiste Leonard Levert, Alfred Mayer, Auguste de Olens, Claude Monet, Bertha Morisot, Merlot Duravage, Joseph de Nittis, Auguste Louis Marie Otten, Leon Auguste Otten, Camille Pizarro, Pierre Auguste Renoir, Stanislas Henri Ruart, Leopold Robert, Alfred Sicily.
Question.
Yeah, I can't understand what you're saying.
These 30 artists would have displayed 135 works, so several of the artists had more than one piece. The artist with the most works was not even an Impressionist. Edgar Degas had submitted 10 works. Claude Monet would oftentimes be seen as a leader of the group, and he had 9 works in this first exhibition, including the namesake of the group, Impression Sunrise. Bertha Morisot also had 9 works in the show. Other artists with good collections in this exhibition included Renoir with 7 works, Pizarro with 5 works, Alfred Sicily with 5 works, and Paul Cézanne with 3 works. Now the intention of this whole thing was to make money. Alfred Sicily would walk away with the most sales, equaling about 1,000 francs. Renoir and Monet both made just under 200 at the show, while Pizarro made about 130. Needless to say, this was a commercial bust.
I have to admit, I wasn't expecting an invitation back.
In December, Renoir led a meeting with all of the stakeholders of this company, and it owed 3,713 francs and only had 278 in hand. So each exhibitor was required to pay an additional 184 francs and change, and they would unanimously decide to liquidate the whole company and be done with it. But, as we know, that wouldn't be the end of it. You see, the next year, in 1875, they would have an art auction at the Hotel Travolt, and they were ready to make some money, although they didn't. Collectors in Britain and America loved this style of work, but people in Europe hated it. And so people that would be dropping in to see the show to spend some money on artwork did not come to spend money on their artwork.
Oh, people will come, Ray. People will most definitely come.
Pierre-Auguste Renoir and Claude Monet to get energized about making a run at yet another art exhibition. They would line up this to be taking place in the gallery of Paul Durand Ruel, who was a prominent art dealer who was known for really specializing with the Impressionists and was one of the very few that actually promoted their work not just in Europe but all around the world.
Prestige worldwide. Why?
Prestige worldwide. The first word in entertainment.
First word.
Now, of course, it would take more than just a couple people to make the whole thing work, and they would acquire a total of 20 individuals that wanted to be included in this exhibition. The artists in this show would include Edouard Ballard, Gustave Caillebotte, Adolphe Felix Callas, Edgar Degas, Marcellin Desbouten, Jacques Francois, Alphonse Legros, Ludovic Napoleon Lepic, Leopold Levert, Jean-Baptiste Millet, Claude Monet, Bertha Morisot, Auguste Auton, Leon Auguste Auton, Camille Pizarro, Pierre Auguste Renoir, Henri Rouart, Alfred Sicily, Charles Telot. All of them are important, of course, but one of the big names that was unveiled during this exhibition was Gustave Caillebotte. As an artist, he would become something of an influencer, but somewhat selfishly, I suppose, as a financier of the project, his influence was critical. Eventually, he would become something of a leader in the group. Now, also prior to this, Degas was something of an unofficial manager of the exhibition. But once Gustave started to get involved, old Degas went down a peg and he didn't like it. So when somebody reads the 1876 Impressionist Exhibition catalog, you'll note that Caillebotte is nowhere to be found in the catalog.
Oh, wait.
Now, as noted in the first Impressionist show, critics would really not like this very much, and they still didn't, but there were some individuals, for example, Edmond Duranty, who was a Parisian writer and critic who was one of the few that began to praise the Impressionists. He would end up writing a 38-page pamphlet about their work and the artists and all that sort of thing because he was so impressed by this show. At any rate, the fact of the matter remains that most critics still couldn't stand the Impressionists.
Haven't thought it through.
No kidding, you didn't think it through.
Trying to do something a little bit different with the exhibition, they thought about how it should be hung, meaning how the artists and artworks are organized within the show itself. Now, this was taking place at the gallery of Paul Durand-Ruel, as I mentioned, and they were using 3 different rooms in his gallery. What they would do is they would stage this as somebody would walk through the show. So up front, they would place the more simply created sorts of works, where the more difficult types of painting styles were placed more in the back. Edgar Degas, with the help of Bertha Morisot, would organize and hang the entire show of 252 paintings. Although technically not an Impressionist, Degas had 24 pieces of work in this exhibition. Morisot had 19 and Monet had 18. I think it's also somewhat interesting to note that Monet's work was hung in the front of the show. Now, I'm not sure if that's because his work may have been more eye-catching or recognizable, or if they just thought it was so simple that they put it up near the front. I'm not real sure. At any rate, most of the work that was in the exhibition was for sale, as they had done previously. However, they also wanted to include work that was just really good examples of the artist's work. So they would actually borrow works that had already sold from buyers so as to allow the public to see these works on display. Side note, although he died in 1870 during the Franco-Prussian War, Frederick Bazille, a respected Impressionist artist who was great friends with Pierre-Auguste Renoir, had his work included in this exhibition as a memorial to the work that he had been producing.
But as the adage goes, out of great tragedy is the mother of invention.
Now, once the doors opened on April the 11th, it would be up for about a month. Now, during that month, the attendance was very much lower than what they had experienced in that first Impressionist exhibition 2 years prior in 1874. But in things like this, unfortunately, it's kind of about the money, not about the number of people that walk through. So, the artists had once again paid to get into the exhibition, and they had made enough profits from the gates and other sources of income that they were able to pay 3,000 franc space rental. Each member was refunded their 1,500 franc entry fee, and as a little bit of a bonus, each artist also received 3 francs from the dividend of the profits that they had earned. Now, it would seem that they started to get things figured out. There was some critical success, and there was some monetary success.
So if you have your friends, and the food and clothes, and the nice car, this is all you need. You don't need anything else. except the home.
The artists agreed for a third show in 1877, an exhibition of painting that took place from April 1st to April 30th, again of 1877. And this would be the first time that the Impressionists actually called themselves the Impressionists, an insult that was given to them via Louis Leroy, an art critic that compared Monet's impression Sunrise to doing an impression of a painting rather than being an actual painting. And again, they took that insult and made it their own. And in this show, they would first become the Impressionists. Although the artist would be somewhat criticized in the show, Monet's work of the train station was very much praised by many, and the entire series was purchased by Paul Durant Ruel, a very prominent gallery owner that pretty much was the guy behind the Impressionists getting recognition more widely and that sort of thing.
Next stop, Cook. Kabanga.
Gustave Caillebotte provided much of the funding as he had done in the previous show in 1876 and was very much adamant that this exhibition should take place. There was some disagreement on how they would get there, but we'll lay all of that out as we go here. So, Monet and Degas, they had a disagreement on the addition of new artists into the show. Degas wanted all kinds of new people to be brought in, new revival, new blood, that sort of thing, but Monet felt that unknown artists would dilute the impact of the group and they would lose momentum moving forward. Camille Pissarro had very much also stirred the pot in the group by wanting them to promote some social causes and become a little bit more political, but most of the folks recognized that might not be a great idea. There was also some tension between Degas and Caillebotte over the organizational control spilling over from 1876. Now, Caillebotte was something of a peacekeeper to the somewhat control-hungry Degas, who also believed that the artists involved should no longer be submitting their work also to the official Paris Salon. Now, most of the others had agreed to this, with the exception of Paul Cézanne. Cézanne would return kind of as a late entry into the show and had already submitted things to the Salon, but in this Impressionist Exhibition of 1877, Cézanne would show 3 watercolors as well as some oil paintings.
Oh, wow, I love it.
The third Impressionist art exhibition would have fewer artists than they had ever had, with only 18 artists represented. Those 18 artists had contributed 241 works of art, and in the official program of the event, the artists that were listed include Gustave Caillebotte, Adolphe Félix Cals, Paul Cézanne, Frédéric Coudray, Edgar Degas, Armand Gallamin, Frédéric Lemay, Leopold Levert, Apollonius Moreau, Claude Monet, Ludovic Petit, Camille Pissarro, Pierre-Auguste Renoir, Henzi Ruart, and Alfred Sicily. Now, if you're playing the home game, you're going to know that there are only 15 artists to recognize there. And I said just a second ago there were 18. Now, here's why. There were errors that were in the official catalog. Now, we know that the last artist to join the exhibition was Bertha Morisot. Obviously not in the catalog, but she was very much on the fence after the 1876 show, as there was some negativity about her work that was reviewed, and she was very much singled out. However, Renoir, Degas, and Caillebotte all convinced her that she should enter the show, with her most notable work that was entered in that exhibition being The Psychic Mirror, created the previous year, and she very much received some great praise and positive feedback from the press for that particular work. But again, that leaves 2 other artists that we don't know who they were in the exhibition. Their works weren't included in the catalog, and they were also not listed in the list of artists. It would be the role of Renoir, Monet, Pissarro, and Caillebotte who would have taken the responsibility of hanging the show, and once it was hung, they were all set to go and ready for the public to finally be able to recognize the greatness of the Impressionist artists.
That's right.
Now, wouldn't that have been great? But that's not exactly how it went down. The public was much more receptive to this work than it had ever been in the past with their previous exhibitions, but it was still attacked by the press and the critics, and there was still a demographic of the public that still did not appreciate the work, and that demographic was the upper higher class wealthy individuals who looked down on the fact that a lot of these Impressionists were painting common people, common subject matters, everyday things, and in particular they looked down upon Cézanne, they looked down on Pizarro, and there are some accounts of those wealthy individuals coming in and viewing the show and demanding a refund because of this commonness, this everyday subject matter that just wasn't representing a Paris or a France or a life that they recognized. Now, I don't know if they got their money back, but critics like Emile Zolda would be very supportive of Cézanne while heightening one individual as the leader of the group.
Hey, Norm, you ever hear of a fella that went by the name of Claude Monet?
Absolutely. That artist was Claude Monet, who would stand out as the unofficial leader of the Impressionists at that point. And that was purely from a outside-in look rather than a organizational or official title or anything like that. On April the 30th, 1877, the show would end with some of these artworks being sold in an auction-type format. Now, they had had good attendance, they had made some cash off of some sales, they had done pretty well with the press, they had won over some of the public, but unfortunately, they had sold this work at auction at disappointingly low prices. So they would consider this the third exhibition of the Impressionists a partial success.
You got another shot at the, the biggest title in the world.
Some of the artists began to drift away. There were some pretty strong supporters that were in favor of this fourth exhibition, those namely being Gustave Caillebotte, Edgar Degas, and Camille Pissarro. These three felt that the only way to move forward was continuing to have exhibitions for the public to view their work. In the third show, they were beginning to get seen in the press, and there was some positive buzz around the group. Now, in contrast to that, you have an individual by the name of Claude Monet who was very unwilling to exhibit at that particular time. He felt that the group and his association with them was having negative influences on the sales of his work, and he was in a pretty dire financial situation at that time. He was lent money by Edouard Manet, Gustave Caillebotte, as well as others, for him to be able to pay for his apartment and continue to work, but his debts were getting out of control. As things were beginning to ramp up, one of the first Impressionist artists to jump ship was Pierre-Auguste Renoir. One of the most famous, to this day, Impressionists out there, was one of the first to leave. His work was instrumental in making the first three exhibitions a success, but he was looking to submit to the Salon. And if you remember back to the third exhibition, Edgar Degas put in place this non-binding rule that Impressionists should not show in the Salon. And so basically, Renoir was put in a situation where he had to leave to save face with Degas. This gamble, for him, definitely paid off. His work was put into the Salon in 1879, the year of the exhibition, as there was no show in 1878, and his work was very well received at the Salon. So that was a pretty good gamble on his part. The second to jump ship was Alfred Sisley. Now, Sisley was always in a financial situation, and he was doing a lot of landscapes and things like that at that time, always moving to find a better deal on places to live because he had a very modest income and he needed a very low rent to be able to survive. So in this continuous state of instability, it affects his work, it affects his mood, and he's depressed, and he ends up writing a letter saying that he's going to leave the group. But unfortunately for him, his works were rejected by the Salon once again, which caused him to be even more depressed than he was in the beginning. At any rate, the third big name to walk away from the exhibition was Paul Cézanne. Now, Paul Cézanne is really more of a post-impressionist than he is an impressionist. However, he was in those first exhibitions, despite some contention on his being there. But be that as it may, Cézanne was a little bit disgruntled by the fact that Monet and Renoir were turning their backs a little bit and withdrawing a little bit from his close friend and mentor and teacher, Camille Pissarro, and he saw that kind of as a blemish on the group, I guess, and he was going to move himself back to Provence, although he maintained his loyalty to Pissarro, but did not ever exhibit with the group again.
What are you guys doing?
Oh, so you care what we're doing, do you?
So there are artists walking away. There are some artists that are coming in to fill the void. There were a number of artists that were Degas friends and associates that were very much working more in a realist style than an impressionist style. Now, a couple were true impressionists, but for the most part, the people that were coming in were not real impressionist type painters. And they were trying to keep the title a little bit more broad to encompass more than just impressionists. The group was really being tarnished more and more because of Edgar Degas. This unwritten rule of not being able to put work in the salon was forcing impressionists out of the group so that they could participate in the salon show. And the group was even more fractured when he got all kinds of pissed off at Pissarro for congratulating Renoir on his success at the salon. The guy in the middle, Caillebotte, worked to smooth over those tensions in the group, and he was able to help Degas and Pissarro mend the fence a little bit, so to speak, but there still loomed a little bit of tension between Caillebotte and Degas, and the mutual friend that kept them working cohesively was Bertha Morisot, who had recently given birth to a daughter, Julie, and so that was occupying her time. So she didn't really have time to fiddle around with their drama. She was not included in the catalog, but there was a letter that was written from Monet after the show took place that clearly indicates that she had exhibited something, but we don't really know for sure what the something was. Now, and she would not have been the only artist not represented in the catalog. There was another artist that was in the show but not represented in the catalog, and that was Paul Gauguin. Again, Gauguin is more of a post-impressionist than an impressionist, but be that as it may, he had a work that was submitted at the very last minute. This was just 10 days before the opening, and the group agreed to allow Gauguin to put his work in this exhibit. Despite the tension between Degas and Monet, Monet would agree to put some work in the show. This was largely due to the influence of Gustave Caillebotte, who would write to him frequently letters of encouragement, asking him and convincing him really to join in with the group. Some paintings were borrowed from collectors so that his presence was a little bit more known, and specific works weren't really brought in just to be sold but more for display. And in the end, Monet was represented with 29 paintings in the show. Degas had nearly that many, with 25 that were listed in the catalog. Now, according to one account, Caillebotte had said that there were 8 paintings by Degas in this show. And there's another account that says that it was more like 10 because the other 15 weren't up to the standard of Degas to be put in the show. Was it 25? Was it 8? Was it 10? Whatever. It doesn't matter. He had work in the show.
I'm not a liar. You just have a common and likable tendency toward exaggeration.
And probably the biggest, most substantial arrival to the 4th Impressionist Exhibition was the arrival of the American painter Mary Cassatt. Through her connections with Degas, she would begin to put her work in the show because there was no real competition component to it. Whatever the real reasons were, her work was included in the show.
Don't take a whole lot to get in there. I guess you have to be able to the entrance exam, you have to be able to write your name in 3 different colors of crayon.
Despite all of these personal dramas that are going on with people leaving and some people coming and all of the drama, the 4th Impressionist Exhibition was actually a success. Over the course of the month, the show would attract more than 16,000 visitors. It was noted that the people were coming in a good mood, they were having a good time, people were coming in and really enjoying the artwork that was being presented. When people are coming through the door, that's going to result in profits. Each artist received 439 francs from the exhibition, and that was just from the gate. Some of the artists were also able to sell their works and make even more than that off the show. One of the 16,000 folks that came to visit the exhibition was George Seurat. He was just 19 years old at the time, but he came in and was astonished by the quality of the work and right away began to pursue with even more passion and vigor his ideas of art creation. And so without question, this exhibition was having an impact on the folks that were coming to view it. If not just this example, I'm sure with other examples as well. With people coming and a good response from the critics, it was evident to the group that things were moving in the right direction. Some of the critics that previously said some not so nice things about the show and the artists and whatnot were starting to come around, and they were praising artists by name. And one of those artists that was really catching their eye was Mary Cassatt, as well as works that were done by Monet, Pissarro, and Degas.
Oh, stop! That's a great one! I just love it! That's the best painting I ever saw!
Once everything was all said and done, it really started to strengthen the bond with the group as they were starting to see critics support the work, the public was supporting the work, there were a lot of positive things really going their way, and this caused the core unit, that being Degas, Cassatt, Caillebotte, and Pissarro, to really strengthen their friendship toward future successes down the road. One of the major components that was added in was the component of bringing in revenue through selling prints. Mary Cassatt had studied printmaking in Rome, and she was bringing this knowledge to the group. Degas had owned a printing press, and the group was working together to experiment with different techniques and really working together to try to create prints that they could use to bolster their income.
My God, are we going to be like our parents?
You can't solve all of your problems just by making a little bit of money. And with a very unspoken yet very visible line between the Impressionist exhibitors and the salon artists, it was becoming more and more apparent either you're with us or you're against us. Either you're going to abide by our policies and unspoken rules, or you're going to go down the road to the other show. And these tensions would have consequences that would last and would be very, very evident as we get closer to the 5th Impressionist Exhibition.
And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same, as we are liberated from our own fear.
So now the table is set for the 5th Impressionist Art Show, which would take place on April the 1st through April the 30th, 1880. One of the major points that they had to try to figure out was where this show was going to take place. Now, typically they're around the end of May, the early April in all of these shows, and they continue with that again the 1st of April, but trying to find a venue that they could go to was somewhat difficult, so they ended up going into a mezzanine of an unfinished building, at that time the outskirts of Paris.
It's all right. I'm not supposed to be here either. I take it you're not.
Camille Pissarro and Edgar Degas were pretty much focused as leadership in the group on the fact that they wanted outside artists that were wanting to work outside the salon system. A direct quote from Pissarro was, "We want artists with the firm will to deviate from the official." But the show was becoming less and less actually impressionist. They were trying to get more artists involved that were more decorative with sculptures and things like that. And they're wanting the show to move in a direction of becoming more and more decorative. Now, in the past, they've done this by adding printmaking and sculptures and fan paintings and all these other things that they had done in the past, but they're doing that even to a larger degree in 1880. We see more and more etchings, we see more and more of an influence by Degas getting his buddies involved. And for an artist like Pizarro, who relied 100% on the sale of his artwork and paintings for his livelihood, it was a financial sacrifice for him to continue down a path with the Impressionists, knowing that it would be less and less the types of people that would actually buy his works. And there were artists like Caillebotte who would financially help him out by helping pay the bills and whatnot so that he could continue to make art for the group. And with him making that type of work for the group, the overall feel of the Impressionist art exhibition was becoming more and more about independent artists than it was about any form of Impressionism. And so there was kind of this double-edged sword which really didn't help him out on either side.
Only sometimes I withhold things. For human beings cannot bear too much reality.
Generally speaking, the public and critics both felt that Impressionist work was still a bit of an unfinished art. It had very little vision to it, and in 1880, Claude Monet decided that he was no longer going to participate, and he went on to the Salon. And without the leader of the Impressionists participating in an Impressionist show, how could they call it an Impressionist show at all? Not only did Monet decline to participate and move to the Salon, but so did Paul Cézanne, Alfred Sisley, and Pierre-Auguste Renoir. These major contributors to the exhibition leaving and defecting from that show very much put a blemish on the Impressionist exhibition. Now, who knows why they all decided to leave? They all had their own rationale behind it. But for Monet, I think one of the leading reasons of logic that he pursued a path toward the Salon as opposed to staying with the Impressionist show was, number one, he didn't really care too much about Degas and his opinions and the direction that he was taking the group. But also, the Salon had implemented a new rule in 1880. The new rule was if you had past acceptances into the official Salon, you automatically got one piece into the show. Now, Monet had had previous experience having his work accepted in 1865, 1866, and 1868. So he knew 100% that he would have at least one work in the show. And of all of the works that he had submitted for acceptance, only one got in. So it worked that he got into the show, but it also was a bit of shooting himself in his own foot because he really only got one piece out to be seen by the public in those shows instead of having multiple pieces in the Impressionist show. But be that as it was, his feeling that Degas was taking the group in a direction where Degas felt like he was bringing in fresh talent and very divisive from the Impressionist message, which was central to the whole idea. And as we follow the Impressionist shows, we'll see this becoming more and more a theme that comes up again and again. But Degas was taking the group in the direction that he felt was the best, where he was getting more and more people, new faces involved, but he saw Monet's betrayal in leaving to go to the Salon as something that he could not forgive, and he completely severed ties for a long period of time with Monet. Despite the ideas and the lack of follow-through on the part of Degas, in particular with this show, what I mean by that is specifically the newspaper.
We can't lose our personal responsibility to drill down on our own and read shit.
So in the fourth show, they started to experiment with printing and things like that, and the idea was brought up by Mary Cassatt. Why not have some form of a newspaper that you could distribute to people so they could learn about the art and the artists and what they were doing, as opposed to just walking in and seeing a bunch of artwork? And they thought, well, what a great idea. Let's develop a bit of a newspaper to promote the show and the works that were developed within the show. So Degas was basically in charge, with Cassatt being the helping hand in the project. It was to be called The Day and the Night, and the day and the night never really saw the light of day. Not to be too punny about it, but it didn't. The writing didn't follow through, the printing didn't follow through, the money didn't follow through, nothing followed through. The deadlines came and went, mostly to the ball dropping of Edgar Degas. Now, in a private letter sent from Mary Cassatt's mother to another family member, she had stated this, and I quote, "Degas is never ready for anything. This time he has made them all miss a great opportunity." keep in mind, Degas and Mary Cassatt were pretty tight. They were pretty good friends at this time, and this very much put a strain on their friendship. They worked together and painted together and gave advice back and forth, and then came a little bit of another slap in the face, depending upon your perspective or how you look at it, when Degas was developing the posters and print material that were going to actually be distributed around to promote the show. Degas had struggled with Caillebotte on whether or not they would put the names on the poster. At the end of the day, they decided that the names of the artists would go on to the poster. But in the end, the women's names, there were 3 women in the show, and none of their names were on the poster. Now, Degas says that he didn't put the names on there to protect them because it would be unethical for women to be using their names as a promotional poster for an art group. Some people say that Mary Cassatt, Bertha Morisot, and Mary Brocquemond were entering the show too late to have their name included, or they made the decision on their own not to have their names on that promotional material, even though in the 4th exhibition they had the names on the show and Mary Cassatt's name is as clear as day on the promotional poster, but whatever. But there are individuals that will argue that Degas was a known misogynist who was in charge of the poster, and he may very well have just made the decision not to put their names on it because he didn't want women to be included on it, and he could make that decision without any questions asked. So I don't know.
Yo, man, they perpetrators, man, the whole 9, man, they real fake, kid.
But speaking of the exhibition, there were 19 members included with over 200 works on display in this space, and those artists that were represented include Felix Brocquemond, Mary Brocquemond, Gustave Caillebotte, Mary Cassatt, Edgar Degas, Jean-Louis Ferrain, Paul Gauguin, Armand Guillemin, Albrecht Lebrun, Jean-Baptiste Leopold Levert, Bertha Morisot, Camilo Pizarro, Jean-François Raffaelli, J.M. Raffaelli, Henri Rouart, Charles Victor Telot, Eugene Vincent Vidal, Victor Viguion, Federico van der Medici. Side note, interestingly enough, Monet and Renoir were the only Impressionists that left the show that would be accepted into the salon.
Yes, you do you, I do me, okay? Where do you get this guy?
He just showed up one day.
Considered the Caillebotte exhibition, this 5th Impressionist art exhibition, although guided in the right direction by Gustave Caillebotte and Mary Cassatt and Bertha Morisot, the disruptions by Edgar Degas just couldn't be overcome. I mean, he promised to bring work that he failed to follow through with. He promised to create this newspaper-type pamphlet thing that never got developed. He was bringing in his protege artists that were making the show less impressionist and more what he thought it should be, and that created more of a conflict between him and Caillebotte. And Caillebotte would definitely see Degas as the problem by pushing out Monet and all of the other Impressionist heavy hitters. You know, people that came to view the show were largely indifferent. They weren't excited about going like they had the previous year, and they didn't mock it like they did the first year. It wasn't hot or cold, it was just stagnant, and that's the worst place to be. And so it was largely a disappointment to all people that were involved. Side note, although not as popular as past exhibitions, it was not without its individuals that attended. For example, 19-year-old Paul Signac, who would go on to become a great post-impressionist painter, was removed by Paul Gauguin for creating a drawing replica of a Degas painting.
I don't think so. Homie, don't play that.
It was less popular because of the location. It was less popular because of the buzz around it. It was less popular because of the turnover of artists. It was less popular from the critics' point of view. It was just all around not really a great show for the Impressionists.
I guess this is just another lost cause, Mr. Payne.
And so we go into this, the 6th Impressionist Art Exhibition, which took place from April 2nd, 1881 through May the 1st, 1881. Most Impressionists wanted to be either a part of that Salon exhibition, which removed some people from the ranks, and Degas was wanting to control who was allowed into the show, and that also removed some people from wanting to be a part of the show. And so there were a couple of negatives that were kind of working in there. But this fracture of the group was very much a divide between the approach of Edgar Degas and Gustave Caillebout, who had very different ideas on where the show should go in their direction. Caillebout wanted to remove all of the realists, namely Jean-Francois Raffaelli, who the previous year was his first year but had huge numbers of work, and he really wanted to reduce that by basically kicking him out of the show, and very much tighten the reins on Degas, who was working to get more and more realists a part of this exhibition than ever before. And the previous year he had a very large influx of realist painters. You had the true Impressionists like Camilla Pissarro saying things like Degas is a terrible man but frank and loyal, as well as saying things like Degas brought disorder into our midst. But in the end, it was Degas that got his way, and that resulted in a flood-in of realist painters into the group.
No, no, no.
It was Degas and Paul Gauguin that would assume control, and they would secure a space that was a little bit unique. Instead of getting one big studio space to show a lot of work, they ended up getting 5 smaller rooms where the works were on display. There were somewhere between 170 and 189 works by 14 artists that were on display for that month period of time. And although they had control over what was going on, they very much needed Gustave Caillebout and his organizational skills and his money to really pull off a much better show. But unfortunately, Gustave Caillebout was at wit's end. He was done with it, and he walked away from the Impressionist show at this time. Side note, although there were 14 artists that were represented in this exhibition, only 13 were living. Adolphe Felix Cowles had passed away, and to honor him and his past representations in the art exhibitions of the Impressionists, his work was still on display for that purpose. Most of these artists that were in this exhibition were associated in some way, shape, or form with Edgar Degas, again, namely Jean-Francois Raffaelli, who was very much the protege of Degas, and once again, 2 years in a row, he had more artwork included in this exhibition than anyone else would. And not to mention the fact that he's not even an Impressionist, he's a realist. The only Impressionists that still remained from that original core were Bertha Morisot, Camilla Pissarro, and Edgar Degas himself, who was really not an Impressionist at all either.
So now you know.
Yeah.
You
Okay,
could go tell your teachers to take off because you're being taught by a genius.
What did I forget?
Paul Durant-Ruel was getting more and more into the investment side of the Impressionist. He had always worked as a gallery owner and very much a promoter of what the Impressionists were doing. But it was at this time that he really started actively buying these works up, and he wanted to put on his own show. So in 1881, separate from this show, he took the works that he had bought and collected and put them on display for resale. And this was a much more cohesive, a much more true to what the real Impressionist shows were. And he did very, very well in that show. And it's also interesting to note that of all of the original artists that he had included, Edgar Degas was not involved in any way, shape, or form. But one of his works that was very well received at this exhibition was the first showing of his 14-year-old ballerina sculpture that he was originally going to put into the 1880 show, but the head proportionally was a little off, so he went back and reworked it and very much ended up with a result that he was much more proud of. And this was the only sculptural work that he had put on display during his lifetime.
Yep, that's exactly what happened.
Not only was Degas' sculptural piece very much iconic during this, or a positive during this exhibition, but so was Camilo Pizarro being very much lifted up as the exemplar of the Impressionist style. He had 26 works were included by Pizarro in the show, and they very much gave him some necessary recognition. He was very much financially struggling at this time, and it very much helped him get work and back on his feet and that sort of thing. And the recognition of Mary Cassatt, who was very highly praised by the press and the public, also kind of came out as a positive amongst all of the negatives of the 6th Impressionist Art Exhibition. These stand out as successes amongst the collapse, with many of the Impressionist artists walking away from the show, with many artists having hard feelings toward Degas around this time period.
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!
By the end of the year, Gustave Caillebout was looking for another opportunity for these Impressionist artists, the true Impressionist artists, to exhibit together once again. And this is considering the fact that he was not involved as an organizer or exhibitor in that 6th show. His only real condition for moving forward with the project was the removal of Jean-Francois Raffaelli, who again was brought in by Edgar Degas as a protege during the 5th exhibition, and he had displayed more artworks than any other artist in the 5th and the 6th shows, despite the fact that he was a realist, not an impressionist. But again, the show was becoming more about independent artists than it was about impressionist artists. He was also pretty high on getting rid of Paul Gauguin, of all people, and this was because of his loyalty to Degas. Gauguin had said that, quote, Degas has the instinct of heart and intelligence. Degas is a talent and as a leader, a rare example of what the artist must be. And this rubbed Caillebout the wrong way and saw him as a potential threat to what was going on, and just wanted to have him removed from the show as well. So you're probably asking yourself, how does this all go down?
I knew better than to ask.
Well, Jean-Francois Raffaelli is removed. And because of this removal, Edgar Degas withdraws completely from this project. In an act of solidarity with Degas, Mary Cassatt, Henri Rouart, and Charles Tillot would also withdraw from the exhibition.
I've got to get out of here. I've got to get out of here. Calm down. Get a hold of yourself.
Stewardess, please let me handle this.
I've got to get out.
So with several artists being on the outside, what was going on the inside with the people that were still looking at attempting to pull off a 7th Impressionist art exhibition? Well, it goes back to the year prior. The fairly prominent gallery owner Paul Durand-Ruel had invested quite a bit of money the past couple years in Impressionist artworks, and a huge financial crash in 1882 would bankrupt several of his investors. Well, Durand-Ruel knew that he needed to make some money, and he knew how to pull it off with success because in 1881 he had already pulled off just such a feat. He knew exactly who he needed to involve. He personally asked Claude Monet and Pierre-Auguste Renoir for their help and support in pulling this off. Both of these artists were of the same opinion. They were focused on showing with Impressionists, not on independence from the salon. Number 2, they did not trust Paul Gauguin, and they had also lost faith in Camille Pizarro for following along with Edgar Degas' ridiculous notion for so long. Both Monet and Renoir did not want to participate with any non-original artist or impressionist type except Gustave Caillebout, who they would agree to allow in because of their friendship and connection over the past several years, as he was not involved in the Impressionist exhibitions until their 2nd exhibition. But anyway, despite all of those other things, they were in debt to Paul Durand-Ruel, and they knew that he knew how to make the money, so they agreed to participate.
Show me the money.
The 7th Impressionist Art Exhibition would be held on March the 1st through the 31st of 1882, in a single large room exhibition space that was secured by, of all people, Henri Rouart, who had just left the exhibition, but he had already paid for the exhibition space, he had secured the date, and so he just kind of let him have it for basically his own troubles. Instead of having a printed catalog, they would go with a handwritten document, and on the opening day of the exhibition, nearly 2,000 people came to view the artworks. After that point, nearly 350 would come and view the exhibition every single day throughout the month. There were 9 artists that were on exhibition that had placed 203 different works around that space. The artists that were involved include Claude Monet, Pierre-Auguste Renoir, Camille Pissarro, Alfred Sicily, Gustave Caillebout, Bertha Morisot, Victor Villon, Paul Gauguin, Armand Guillaume. Side note, despite his hesitations, Gustave Caillebout would allow Paul Gauguin to come into the 7th Impressionist Art Exhibition, as after having some personal conversations, Paul Gauguin had expressed his disapproval on how Degas had handled several things, including some of the organizational things that he had done and also things that he had not followed through with. And so that got him back into the good graces and into this particular exhibition.
These guys are capable of a lot more than you think. You'd be surprised.
The press as a whole was much more receptive of this Impressionist art exhibition than it had been in comparison to many years previous. It was a return to the original concept of what the Impressionist exhibition was supposed to be. Camille Pissarro and Gustave Caillebout had worked very, very hard to have this become a success, with Paul Durand-Ruel as a force behind the scenes, securing these major artists and really pulling off a great exhibition. Impressionism was influencing the salon artists, and buyers were starting to come around much more readily to collect Impressionist artworks.
You gotta ask yourself a question. Do I feel lucky?
4 years had passed. Bertha Morisot was asking around about having another Impressionist exhibition. There was certainly interest there, and she went to the great master of the Impressionists, Camille Pissarro, to get his input on it, and he was very instrumental in getting this off the ground and a huge advocate for the art of the Impressionists. And they had talked around about getting this thing going for quite some time, obviously, and Pissarro was a huge advocate for allowing Paul Signac and Georges Seurat in their pointillist or neo-impressionist style allowed into the show. And this is mostly because Pissarro was largely working in that exact same style, learning from Seurat primarily, continuing to work in that style, but at any rate, they were trying to get their group together to move forward.
Then what are we waiting for? Yo, Joe!
At their core, they felt that Edgar Degas was an important part to organizing the exhibition and allowed him to help and take the lead back, although they continued to have some issues with him involving all of his realist friends into the exhibition as well. Degas insisted that they hold this event May 15th through June the 15th of 1886, and why those specific dates? It's all because of the Salon. He wanted to directly compete with the Salon and what they were putting together. Most of the other people felt like this was a ridiculous idea. Why in the world would you compete with the biggest art show in Paris? Why not hold it in April like they always had done, leading up to the Salon? But no, Degas had his mind made up, and despite this disagreement, he got his way. Now, a moment ago, I said that Bertha Morisot was influential in getting this going, and she was. But she was also a little bit upset by all of the infighting and all the other things going on, so she would withdraw her support from the organization component, and this put Degas 100% in charge of these things, and he was completely left to his own devices. But it did leave the matter of the finances up in the air, because he and Mary Cassatt were kind of working together to get this going, as she kind of became a instrumental part in the organization. once Morisot was out, but they were both unwilling to take on that financial burden. Pizarro was really big in trying to get this thing going, but he had no money, as normal, and it was really kind of up in the air as to where the funding and the money would come from. Gustave Caillebotte had his issues with Degas, and he was not involved. Monet was not involved. Renoir was not involved. Sicily was not involved. Cézanne was not involved. And so it's really kind of unknown, honestly, as to where the money even came from to get this thing going.
Investors? Possibly you!
In the end, they would assemble 17 artists to display 249 works, again during this show that would take place between May and June of 1886. The artists involved would include Brocquemond, Cassatt, Degas, Forain, Gauguin, Guillemin, Morisot, Camille Pissarro, Lucien Pissarro, Redon, Ruart, Schauffenecker, Seurat, Signac, Tillot, Vignon, and Zandomenigy. Paul Gauguin was back and also brought with him Emile Schauffenecker, and Camille Pissarro, as mentioned, also brought in his son Lucien for the first and last only time in this exhibition. Several of these artists were brought in by Degas. Several of those names we have talked about in the past, but one that is very much withheld was Jean-Francois Raffaelli, who you will recall was the artist that was the topic of a lot of discussion. He was very promoted by Degas as a protege of his, but was not allowed back in by Degas because of all of the conflict that arose from him being included in the first place. So he disinvited him from his involvement.
From now on, we are enemies. You and I.
Georges Seurat's painting titled A Sunday Afternoon of the Island of La Grande Jatte was a major work of this particular exhibition, and as noted previously, his influence on Pissarro was pretty substantial. All of the works that had been exhibited this particular year by Pissarro were shown in a pointillist style, which very much shows the influence that Seurat had on his work. Another huge feature of this particular exhibition were the pastel drawings that were created by Edgar Degas, which were a little bit more of the intimate voyeuristic style of Degas, kind of weird, creepy stuff as we look at them today, but very much show his drawing expertise at the same time, I guess.
Always overdressing for the wrong occasions.
Outside of this particular exhibition, this is also a time of Paul Durand-Ruel's push of the Impressionist artwork in the United States of America. In 1886, 300 works were sent to New York, which include the works of Monet, Pissarro, Renoir, Manet, Morisot, Sicily, Degas, Signac, and Seurat, in a show that was called The Works in Oil and Pastel by the Impressionists of Paris. America was a new bright point to sell these Impressionist artworks, but Monet would soon have a different opinion. He didn't really like the idea of these American barbarians purchasing his work and often refused to sell or send his works to America later on in his career. Although Durand-Ruel would say to him in correspondence, I quote, "Don't think that the Americans are savages. On the contrary, they are less ignorant, less bonded by routine than our French collectors." In contrast, Monet had said, and I quote, "I've never been particularly in favor of the American venture, and if you take them," meaning the paintings, "away to America, it will be I who lose art everywhere." And he said this in 1886, the same year that this was all taking place, in correspondence to Paul Durand-Ruel. And it was the American Mary Cassatt that tirelessly worked as an advocate for this work to be sent over to America in the first place as well, who seemed to have a pretty good relationship with Monet and all of the Impressionists for that matter.
It was as big as Hulkamania.
This 8th show was underwhelming, but not completely disappointing. The art market was shifting across the Atlantic, and these Impressionists were looking at new opportunities and approaches, and appreciators of their work had expanded to America. And that would be the end of the Impressionist exhibitions that were formally put together by the living artists. They would never again come together as a unified group to exhibit again at all the same way because of so many variables and cogs of the wheel not really coming together. But we can enjoy looking back and reflecting on what happened, what could have happened with this interesting group of artists that came together to become known as the Impressionists. Now, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I enjoy being able to bring it to you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.